Okay, let's unpack this. If you ask a kid to draw a bee, or, honestly, if you ask yourself to just picture one right now in your head, I can almost guarantee what pops up.
Oh, absolutely. It's that plump little fuzzy oval, right?
Exactly. It's got the bright yellow and black stripes. There's a tiny sharp little stinger right on the back. And maybe, depending on how much you watched those breakfast cereal commercials growing up, the bee is holding a tiny wooden dipper full of honey.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate cartoon archetype. That specific image is just so universally ingrained in our culture that it completely transcends language at this point.
It really does. And it's a very comforting image, right? We have this collective mental shorthand for what a bee is, how it behaves, where it lives. I mean, we all know the story. They live in massive buzzing hives. They serve this giant queen.
Like spending all their days making honey.
Yeah, building those perfect hexagonal wax combs. And, they will absolutely sting you if you step on them barefoot in the grass.
Definitely. We've placed them into this very neat, very tidy conceptual box.
Right.
Because it makes the natural world feel orderly.
Right. But then, and this is why we're here today, you actually look at the entomological data. You open up the literature, and the moment you do, that neat little conceptual box doesn't just open, it completely disintegrates.
It really is a true paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Once you understand the sheer scale and the bizarre mechanics of what a bee actually is, you really can't look at a flower the same way ever again.
No, you can't. And that's why we're so glad you're sitting at the table with us today for this deep dive. Because our mission for the next hour or so is to completely shatter that honeybee-centric view of the world.
Completely dismantle it.
Yes, we've got this massive stack of sources in front of us. We're pulling from deep evolutionary histories of the entire clade Anthophila, comprehensive encyclopedias of insect anatomy, all the way over to pediatric health literature.
The pediatric stuff really breaks down the differences nicely.
It really does. So we're going to explore the bizarre, the complex, and frankly, the totally alien reality of the bees that share our planet.
Yeah, because we are looking at an entire planet's worth of diversity here. We'll be tracing their deep evolutionary origins, exploring anatomical quirks that, they sound like science fiction.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll unpack quantum-level navigational skills and examine these intense ecological battles that are happening right under our noses.
It's so much, but I want to hit you with the hook right away because this just blew my mind when I was reading the sources. Think about everything you probably picture when you hear the word bee.
The hives, the queens, the wax.
Right, all of it. All of those traits applied to less than a fraction of 1% of all the bees on Earth.
Yeah. It's a statistical reality that just completely upends our baseline assumptions.
A fraction of 1%.
I know. Before we can even dive into how these creatures evolved or, how they managed to fly, we have to fundamentally redefine what the word bee even means.
So let's talk scale. Because the sheer numbers jumping out of these sources are just staggering. There are over 20,000 known species of bees recognized by science today.
Right, spread across 7 different distinct families.
20,000 species. Now, out of that massive global population, how many of them are actually recognized as honeybees? 7. Exactly 7 species.
We have to let that sink in. 7 species out of 20,000.
It's absurd.
It really is. That leaves 19,993 species of bees out there living entirely different lives, completely detached from that whole hive mind narrative.
Wow.
And the single most defining characteristic of that silent majority is that they are solitary. Over 90% of all bee species do not live in hives.
No queen.
No concept of a queen at all. They don't have a worker caste. They don't produce a single drop of honey. They don't secrete wax. And honestly, the vast majority of them rarely, if ever, sting humans.
We're talking about the unsung heroes of the ecosystem here. The sources mention mason bees, carpenter bees, leafcutter bees, sweat bees.
Yeah, they're essentially just single mothers out there doing the grueling work of survival entirely by themselves.
Right, and the physical diversity among these 20,000 species is just as extreme as their lifestyles because, we tend to think of a bee as being roughly the size of a thumbnail.
Finger take.
But our sources highlight these incredible, almost unbelievable physical extremes. On one end of the spectrum, you have the dwarf stingless bees from the tribe Melipone. The workers in some of these species are less than 2 millimeters long.
2 millimeters.
2 millimeters, that's nothing.
It's a creature so small it challenges our visual perception. If one landed on your arm, you would likely just dismiss it as a speck of dirt or like a tiny gnat.
You definitely wouldn't recognize it as a bee.
Not at all. You wouldn't see the complex biology.
But then you pan over to the other extreme. You contrast that microscopic pinhead with Wallace's giant bee, scientifically known as Megachill Pluto.
Oh, that one is fascinating.
It's an absolute behemoth. It's found in the island forests of Indonesia. The females of the species can measure up to 39 millimeters in length.
Right.
That's an inch and a half of solid flying insect. And it's equipped with these massive stag beetle-like jaws that they apparently use to scrape sticky resin from trees.
Yeah, it is a visually arresting animal. When the entomologist Alfred Russel Wallace first documented it back in the 19th century, he described it as this large, black, wasp-like insect with immense jaws.
I mean, it sounds
It
terrifying.
looks formidable, yeah. Almost prehistoric.
I'm not going to lie, if a flying thumb with stag beetle jaws buzzed past my head, I would probably hit the deck.
Most people would.
But despite this insane range in size and shape, from basically invisible to totally terrifying, they all share a specific anatomical blueprint. And that blueprint defines the clade Anthophila. This is where the biology gets super interesting to me. For instance, think about the eyes. A bee doesn't have 2 eyes,
Right.
It has 5.
Yeah, this is a perfect example of how highly specialized their anatomy is.
Because we usually only see the 2 massive compound eyes, right? Those are the ones taking up most of the real estate on the sides of their head. It gives them that classic bug-eyed look.
Right, the ommatidia.
But hidden right on the very top of their head, nestled in all that fuzz, are 3 tiny, simple eyes called ocelli.
And those ocelli serve a completely different neurological function than the compound eyes.
Really? How so?
Well, the large compound eyes are built out of thousands of tiny lenses, the ommatidia to form complex visual images and, detect motion. But the 3 ocelli aren't forming images at all.
Wait, what are they doing then?
They're essentially highly sensitive biological light meters,
So they're just measuring brightness.
brightness, and specifically the horizon line. They help the bee orient itself during flight by constantly measuring the light intensity from the sky versus the darker ground.
Oh, wow. Like an autopilot sensor.
Exactly. And they also act as an early warning system.
Yeah.
Because they're situated right on top of the head. If a predator, say like a bird, casts a sudden shadow from above, those ocelli register that instantaneous drop in light.
Can trigger a reflex.
Right. They trigger an evasive reflex before the compound eyes even have time to process what the predator is.
Okay, so 5 eyes feeding distinct data streams directly to the brain. That is so cool. Moving down the body, the sources note they have a 3-segmented thorax.
Yes, the engine room.
Right, the engine room. Because this is where all 6 legs and the 2 pairs of wings are firmly anchored. And then behind that is the abdomen, which is made up of 9 segments. And here is a fantastic piece of trivia that I'm definitely pulling out at my next dinner party.
All about the stinger.
Yes, the stinger that we all fear is not just a weapon. It's actually a highly modified version of the last 3 segments of that abdomen. It's an adapted ovipositor and egg-laying tube.
Which brings us to a fascinating biological absolute. Male bees, across every single one of those 20,000 species, do not possess stingers.
They can't sting you.
They physically cannot sting you because the stinger evolved directly from the female reproductive anatomy. It is a weapon exclusive to the females.
That completely changes the dynamic when you see a bee buzzing around. I mean, if it's a male, it's just putting on a tough act.
All buzz, no bite, well, no sting.
Exactly. Now let's talk about the antenna, because from what I understand reading these sources, the antenna are basically the bee's primary dashboard for interacting with the universe.
Oh, they are exquisitely sensitive instruments. Structurally, you can actually sex a bee just by counting the segments on the antenna.
Really, just by counting?
Yeah. Males typically have 13 segments on their antenna, while females have 12.
Yeah.
And they're what entomologists call geniculate, which is just a fancy scientific way of saying they look like a bent elbow.
And what exactly are they doing with those elbowed antennae?
They're packed with thousands of microscopic sensory cells, mechanoreceptors, and chemoreceptors. So when a bee waves its antenna around, it's simultaneously smelling the chemical pheromones of a flower, tasting the air, feeling the physical texture of its environment, and even detecting subtle shifts in air currents.
And they use them to hear, right? I read that and had to do a double take.
In a manner of speaking, yes. I mean, they don't have ears like mammals do. Instead, they detect acoustic vibrations in the air using something called the Johnston's organ, which is located right at the base of the antenna.
So they feel the sound.
Right. When another bee buzzes, the antenna vibrate, and the bee translates that physical movement into what we would consider sound.
That is just wild. Now, I want to bring in a really practical comparison from the pediatric health literature we reviewed because I think it grounds all this biology. We've all seen this happen. You're at a summer picnic, you're enjoying a sandwich, and suddenly something yellow and black lands on your soda can.
And someone immediately panics.
Inevitably, someone panics, swats at it, and yells, "Bee!" But the pediatric literature provides this great, simple breakdown to help parents and kids tell the difference between bees and their closest cousins, the wasps.
Because they are absolutely not the same thing.
No, they have very different motives at your picnic.
The mortals are fundamentally different. I mean, wasps are carnivores, bees are herbivores.
Exactly. The literature points out that wasps are generally sleek. They look armored and smooth with those very distinct pinched-in waists. And because they're carnivores, they're actively hunting.
Right, they hunt spiders, they hunt caterpillars.
And yes, they will absolutely try to steal the ham right off your sandwich or the sugar from your soda. They're aggressive scavengers when they need to be. They also build those gray, papery nests out of wood fibers that they've chewed up.
Whereas bees, broadly speaking, are the vegetarians of this evolutionary family tree.
Right. They don't want your ham sandwich.
Not at all. They rely entirely on flowers for their nutritional needs. The nectar they drink provides the necessary carbohydrates to fuel their flight muscles, and the pollen they gather provides the essential proteins, fats, and minerals they need to feed their developing larvae back in the nest.
And because their entire existence revolves around gathering pollen, their bodies look different. I mean, they aren't sleek and smooth like a wasp. They're fuzzy. But that fuzz isn't just a random cosmetic feature, is it?
Oh, not at all. It's highly functional. If you take a single hair from a bee's thorax and place it under a scanning electron microscope, you'll see that it isn't a smooth cylinder like a human hair or, a dog's hair.
What does it look like?
It is intricately branched. It looks almost like a tiny fern or a microscopic feather.
So it has extra surface area.
Massive amounts of extra surface area. This is a morphological adaptation specifically designed by millions of years of evolution to trap and hold microscopic, incredibly sticky grains of pollen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when a bee lands on a flower, static electricity literally pulls the pollen grains right onto these branched hairs. The entire body of the bee is a specialized, living, pollen-gathering machine.
And they even have built-in tools to manage it, right? The combs. I love this detail in the encyclopedias.
Yes. On their forelegs, many bees have a specialized notch lined with stiff bristles. After they get covered in pollen, they will actually pull their antenna through this notch to scrape the pollen off.
Because otherwise it gets clogged.
Exactly. If they didn't do this, the pollen would completely coat those sensitive mechanoreceptors we just talked about, and the bee would essentially go blind and deaf to its chemical environment.
Wow. So to recap our baseline here, you have the sleek, predatory, meat-eating wasp on one side and the fuzzy, vegetarian, highly specialized pollen-gathering bee on the other. It really brings home the idea that the honeybee, our beloved cartoon archetype, is essentially the golden retriever of the bee world.
The golden retriever, that's a very apt way to frame it.
Think about it. The honeybee is famous, it's universally beloved, it's been heavily domesticated by humans for centuries, and it lives in these big, highly cooperative, noisy packs. But if you try to understand all bees by only looking at the honeybee...
It's like trying to understand all canines by only looking at a golden retriever.
Exactly. It's the exact equivalent of ignoring every wolf, every fox, every solitary coyote, every dingo roaming the outback. You are missing the actual story of the broader species.
You're completely blinding yourself to the true ecological reality. The domestic honeybee is the ultimate outlier.
But if that's true, I have to push back here for a second. I have to ask the obvious question.
Sure, go ahead.
If 90% of these 20,000 species are solitary, if the overwhelming majority of bees are just single mothers quietly living alone in tiny holes dug into a dirt bank or, hiding inside hollowed-out blackberry brambles, why did the 1% steal the PR campaign?
That's a great question.
Right. Why is their entire global public reputation built on the idea of ultimate teamwork, hive minds, and massive swarms?
Honestly, it all comes down to human utility and historical bias. We notice the 1% because the 1% produce a tangible resource that humans desperately wanted.
Sugar.
Exactly. A massive calorie-dense surplus of sugar. A solitary leafcutter bee doesn't make a surplus of food. She gathers exactly enough pollen for his single egg, seals it up, and leaves. There's nothing there for a human to exploit.
Right. You can't farm a solitary insect.
But a honeybee colony, because it has to survive the winter as a massive collective, hoards resources. They produce honey in staggering excess. So our entire cultural and historical relationship with bees was forged through the lens of agriculture, domestication, and essentially theft.
Theft, wow. Yeah.
We noticed the hive because the hive was uniquely useful to our own survival. We completely ignored the other 19,993 species because they didn't offer us anything we could put in a jar.
That makes total sense. We just follow the sugar. But knowing all this, knowing that bees are essentially just fuzzy vegetarian offshoots of wasps, leads us directly to the next massive question posed by these evolutionary sources.
In transit,
Right. How does a sleek, vicious, meat-eating insect predator evolve into a fuzzy little flower-visiting vegan?
to map out that transition, we really have to rewind the clock significantly. We have to look back roughly 124 million years, dropping ourselves right into the middle of the early Cretaceous period.
We are talking deep time here. Dinosaurs are actively walking the earth.
Oh yeah, the absolute peak of the dinosaur era, and the map of the world looks entirely alien. The continents haven't yet settled into their modern positions. We're looking at the massive supercontinent of West Gondwana,
Gondwana.
right, which is the giant landmass that existed just before tectonic forces violently ripped it apart to form what we now recognize as South America and Africa.
Okay, so we're in West Gondwana 124 million years ago. What do the ancestors of bees look like at this exact moment?
Well, they aren't bees yet. The immediate evolutionary ancestors of modern bees were a specific group of stinging wasps belonging to the family Ammoplanidae.
Ammoplanidae. And like we established, wasps are carnivores. So these ancient ancestors are predators. They're actively hunting other insects to feed their young.
Exactly, they are flying predators. But during this exact same window of the early Cretaceous, something revolutionary is quietly happening in the plant kingdom.
A flower show up.
Yes. Up until this point, the world's flora was largely dominated by ferns, cycads, and massive conifers. But now, the very first angiosperms, the flowering plants, are beginning to appear, diversify, and spread. Suddenly, the landscape is dotted with these new structures producing a strange, protein-rich dust.
Pollen. Okay, I have the picture in my head. You've got these predatory Ammoplanidae wasps flying around looking for meat, and you have these brand new flowers producing sticky pollen. How do these two entirely separate biological developments collide?
So, the leading evolutionary hypothesis, which is strongly supported by comparative morphology, suggests that these predatory wasps were hunting small insect prey. Think tiny ancient beetles or early flies.
Yeah.
And those prey insects happen to be some of the earliest flower visitors. They were going into these primitive flowers to eat or find shelter.
So the prey insects are just tumbling around inside these new flowers, getting absolutely covered in this sticky new pollen dust.
Precisely. The wasp swoops in, catches the pollen-coated beetle, paralyzes it, flies it back to its underground nest, and feeds it to its carnivorous larvae.
Aye.
Generation after generation, for millions of years, these wasp larvae are consuming a mixed diet. They're eating the insect meat, but they're also incidentally consuming the heavy coating of pollen that is caked all over the prey.
They're basically getting a side salad with their steak.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
And as it turns out, that side salad is incredibly nutritious. Pollen is a biological powerhouse. It's densely packed with complex proteins, essential lipids, and vitamins.
Wow.
Over vast stretches of evolutionary time, natural selection began to favor the wasps, whose larvae could efficiently digest and thrive on that pollen. Eventually, a profound behavioral shift occurred.
They realized the side salad was actually better than the steak.
From an energy expenditure standpoint, yes. I mean, why spend the massive amount of energy required to track, fight, paralyze, and carry a struggling insect when you can just fly directly to the static flower and gather the pollen yourself?
It's just sitting there.
Exactly. The transition from carnivory to herbivory was complete. The wasp became a bee.
That is just, I mean, it's like a strict, lifelong carnivore ordering a chicken salad for lunch one day, realizing the lettuce and the vinaigrette dressing actually taste way better and provide more energy than the dried chicken itself, and just deciding right then and there to commit to a hardcore vegan lifestyle for the next 100 million years.
It's a very humorous way to picture it, but biologically, that is exactly the shift that occurred. And once they made that dietary leap, it triggered a massive evolutionary radiation.
Because the food source was everywhere.
Right. Because right around the time these early bees are establishing themselves, about 100 million years ago, geology intervenes. West Gondwana begins to fracture.
Oh, the continents break up.
Plate tectonics slowly, unstoppably widen the rifts, creating new oceans and isolating land masses.
So the ground literally splits beneath their feet, separating different families of these new bees.
Geography drives evolution.
Mm.
As the continents drifted apart, the early bees were isolated on different land masses. The ancestors of the Mellidae family found themselves geographically locked in what would become Africa.
Okay.
The ancient lineage of the Callididae family evolved in South America, and as tectonic plates continued to shift, some of them eventually migrated across land bridges into Australia before it fully detached and became an island continent around 80 million years ago.
So plate tectonics essentially seeded the globe with different base models of bees.
That's exactly right.
But it wasn't a smooth ride to the modern day, because if we look at the timeline in our sources, about 66 million years ago, a massive 6-mile-wide asteroid slams into the Yucatan Peninsula, the KPG extinction event. The dinosaurs are completely wiped out, the skies go dark. What happens to the bees?
It was an apocalyptic bottleneck. We know from genomic analysis and incredible fossil discoveries that the KPG extinction was absolutely devastating for bees.
Tell me about the fossils, because the sources mention a really specific one found in New Jersey that sounded amazing.
Yes, Cretotrigona prisca. It is a phenomenal specimen.
Yeah.
It was discovered trapped in a piece of amber unearthed in New Jersey, and it dates back approximately 70 million years.
Wow, 70 million.
Right, and amber is fossilized tree resin, so it is nature's perfect time capsule. When an insect gets caught in sticky resin, and that resin hardens and fossilizes over millions of years, the preservation is immaculate.
You can see everything.
We can see the microscopic hairs, the wing venation, the shape of the mandibles. Cretotrigona prisca gives us a high-definition snapshot of a highly evolved eusocial bee living just before the asteroid hit.
But then the asteroid hits, and if the skies are choked with ash for years, blocking out the sun, the plants die. And if the plants die, the flowers die.
Yeah. And the bees starve. The collapse of global plant life due to the prolonged impact winter would have caused mass extinctions across almost all ancient bee lineages. The fossil record shows a massive gap.
But obviously, because we have 20,000 species today, some of them must have made it through the fire.
Life always finds a way to cling on. A few robust, highly adaptable lineages survive the bottleneck, likely by sheltering deep underground or, relying on the few hardy plants that weathered the dark.
Makes sense.
And as the planet slowly healed, the skies cleared, and the climate began to dramatically warm during the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, these surviving bees experienced a second massive radiation.
They spread out again.
They spread outward, migrating from the southern continents into the northern hemisphere, colonizing the recovering landscapes of Europe, Asia, and North America.
And as they spread, they entered into what the sources describe as one of the most intense, high-stakes evolutionary arms races in the history of the planet, the coevolution of bees and flowers. Because early flowers, before the bees showed up in force, they were pretty basic, right?
Very basic. The earliest angiosperms were essentially just shallow, open bowls of pollen and nectar. They weren't picky about who pollinated them. They relied heavily on beetles, which are famously clumsy pollinators.
Just crashing around.
A beetle just crashes into the flower, eats some pollen, gets covered in it, and maybe happens to crash into another flower of the same species later. It's incredibly inefficient.
But once the bees arrive, these highly specialized, flying, fuzzy insects that only want pollen and nectar, the flowers realize they have a dedicated delivery service.
Exactly. The plants wanted to ensure their genetic material, their pollen, was delivered specifically and efficiently to other flowers of their exact same species, rather than just being scattered randomly across the forest floor by a clumsy beetle.
So the flowers upgraded.
So they began to specialize. They started hiding their sugary nectar deeper and deeper within long tubular structures, restricting access to only the most dedicated insects.
And in response, the bees basically say, oh, you're making the tube longer. Fine, I'll evolve a longer tongue.
That is the arms race. Flowers evolved incredibly deep corolla tubes. Bees evolved vastly elongated tongues, or proboscises, to reach the bottom. I mean, some species of bees have tongues that are longer than their entire bodies.
That's absurd.
But it didn't stop at physical shape. Flowers developed intricate, complex, ultraviolet patterns on their petals. These patterns are completely invisible to the human eye, but to a bee's specialized compound eyes, they act like glowing, high-contrast landing strips on a dark runway.
Pointing exactly to the nectar source.
Exactly.
And while the flowers are building better runways, the bees are building better cargo holds. They evolve thicker scopal hairs. They evolve those specialized pollen baskets on their hind legs called corbiculae to pack away massive amounts of food.
The incredible explosion of diversity in flowering plants is just inextricably linked to the evolutionary adaptations of the bees. They molded each other over millions of years.
Now, when I look at all this deep history, there are two concepts the experts in these sources highlight that just fascinate me.
Okay, what are they?
The first is something called niche conservatism. Explain what the genomic data is telling us about where bees actually prefer to live.
Ah, niche conservatism. It's a profound realization. Because bees evolved alongside lush flowering plants. Human intuition suggests that the greatest diversity of bees on Earth should be found in the most lush flowering environments.
Right, like the Amazon rainforest or the jungles of Southeast Asia. That's what you'd think.
But the genomic data tells a completely different story.
Right, the data says they basically hate the rainforest.
Well, hate is a strong word, but they certainly don't peak there. Genomic tracing shows that the very first bees originated in the xeric environments of West Gondwana.
Xeric meaning dry.
Xeric meaning incredibly dry, arid, and highly seasonal. Today, 124 million years later, if you look at a heat map of global bee diversity, the hottest spots are the deserts of the American Southwest, the arid regions of the Mediterranean, and the dry scrublands of South Africa.
But why? I mean, if flowers need water, why do bees love the desert?
Because of the fungal pressure.
Fungus?
Yes. In a hot, hyperhumid rainforest environment, everything rots quickly. If a solitary female bee digs a hole in the damp jungle soil, packs it with a wet ball of pollen, and lays an egg, the ambient humidity almost guarantees that massive fungal blooms will overrun the nest and consume the pollen before the larvae can even hatch.
Oh, wow.
It is incredibly difficult to store food in a humid environment. In a dry desert environment, the pollen ball remains perfectly stable. They have conservatively clung to their ancestral dry ecological niche across deep time because it is the safest place to store their food.
Which perfectly sets up the second evolutionary mind bender for me. Because if fungus is the ultimate enemy of the stored pollen ball, some bees didn't just move to the desert, they actually evolved a biological weapon to fight the fungus.
They did.
Let's talk about Acarinaria.
This is one of the most elegant and bizarre mutualistic relationships in the animal kingdom. When we hear the word mite in the context of bees, we usually immediately think of the catastrophic varroa destructor mite that parasitizes and kills honeybees.
Right, the bad guys.
But millions of years ago, certain lineages of solitary bees developed a completely different relationship with a different type of mite.
They made a truce.
More than a truce, it was an alliance. Through natural selection, some solitary bees evolved actual physical pouches on their bodies. These aren't accidental crevices. They are highly specialized anatomical pockets called acarinaria, located at the base of the abdomen or the thorax.
They literally evolved pockets.
Pockets designed for one specific purpose, to serve as a secure, climate-controlled home for specific beneficial species of mites. The bee provides these mites with a safe place to live and a free ride to new environments.
And what does the bee get out of this deal? I mean, why carry the extra weight?
Agricultural security. When the female bee finishes digging her underground nest, she provisions it with a massive ball of gathered pollen and lays her egg. At that exact moment, the beneficial mites crawl out of her acarinaria pockets and drop right onto the pollen ball.
Just deploying the troops.
Yes. As the bee seals the nest and flies away to die, the mites go to work. They patrol the surface of the pollen ball, actively eating any harmful fungal spores or mold that try to take root in the damp underground chamber.
So the bee is literally carrying around its own microscopic biological hazmat team in its pockets just to ensure its baby's food doesn't get moldy.
Exactly. They are agricultural cleaners, ensuring the survival of the next generation. It is a stunning example of how evolutionary pressures shape biology.
Okay, so we've established how their physical bodies evolved to gather food and how they fight the environmental pressures around them. But these physical and dietary changes forced a massive behavioral change because obviously how you gather your food dictates how you structure your home.
It sets the entire foundation.
And this leads us into the complex world of bee society, sex, and genetics. Because the way bees reproduce fundamentally breaks the rules of mammalian genetics that we are all taught in high school biology.
Oh, it throws the mammalian rulebook completely out the window. Mammals, including humans, dogs, whales, we operate on a diploid genetic system. We inherit two complete sets of chromosomes.
Yeah.
One set from our mother and one set from our father.
Right, a 50-50 split. Nice and easy to understand.
But bees, along with ants and wasps, operate on a uniquely complex system called haplodiploidy.
All right, I need you to map out haplodiploidy for me because this is the concept in the reading that honestly forces you to read the paragraph 3 times just to wrap your head around it.
It's tricky. Let's break it down step by step. In a haplodiploid system, the sex of the offspring is not determined by an X or Y chromosome like in humans. It is determined entirely by whether or not the egg is fertilized. So when a female bee, let's use a queen honeybee, as our example goes out on her mating flight, she mates with several males, but she doesn't use that sperm immediately. She stores it inside a specialized internal organ called a spermatheca.
She just holds on to it.
She can keep that sperm alive and viable inside her body for years.
She has a biological storage tank.
Exactly. Now, when she returns to the hive and begins laying eggs, she makes a localized biological choice for every single egg she lays. As an egg passes down her oviduct, she can choose to release a tiny amount of sperm from the spermatheca to fertilize it.
And as she does.
If the egg is fertilized, it contains 2 complete sets of chromosomes, one from her and one from the male she mated with. That diploid fertilized egg will always, 100% of the time, develop into a female bee.
Okay, so fertilized equals female. Mom plus dad equals daughter. That completely tracks with my human understanding. But what happens if she doesn't release the sperm?
If she chooses not to release sperm, she lays an unfertilized egg. That egg contains only her single set of chromosomes. There is no genetic input from a male whatsoever.
Wait.
That unfertilized haploid egg will develop into a male bee.
Wait, let me say that back to you. A male bee has no father.
That is correct. A male bee,
Yeah.
a drone, has no father, and therefore he cannot have sons. He only have a mother, and he can only have daughters. He is essentially a flying gamete, just a genetic clone of half of his mother's DNA.
That is wild. I mean, my brain is twisting trying to picture that family tree. But why does this genetic quirk matter? I mean, why is haplodiploidy the entire foundational bedrock for why massive eusocial hives exist in the first place?
Because it wildly skews the genetic math of family relationships. And in evolution, math is destiny. This brings us to the evolutionary biologist W.D. Hamilton and his theory of inclusive fitness. Let's map out the relationships again. In a normal human family, you share roughly 50% of your genes with your mother, 50% with your father, and 50% with your siblings.
Right, a coin flip across the board.
But in a beehive, the math is warped. Because the male bee, the father, is haploid, he only has one single set of chromosomes to give. He doesn't shuffle the deck, he just hands the exact same cards to every single daughter.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, every female worker bee in a hive that shares the same father receives the exact same paternal DNA.
Okay, so the sisters are identical on their dad's side.
Yes, they share 100% of their father's genes and 50% of their mother's genes. When you average that out mathematically, sister bees in a hive share 75% of their genetic code with each other. They're incredibly closely related. Super sisters, biologists sometimes call them.
Super sisters. Let me put myself in the bee's shoes for a second here. If I am a female worker bee, I share 75% of my DNA with my thousands of sisters buzzing around me. But if I decide to leave the hive, find a mate, and have my own baby daughter, I would only share the standard 50% of my DNA with her.
Precisely. You've hit the evolutionary crux. Evolution is just a cold, calculated numbers game. The goal is to pass as much of your genetic code into the next generation as possible. For a female worker bee, Hamilton's rule dictates that it is vastly more genetically profitable. It's a better return on investment to abandon her own reproductive potential, stay in the hive, and help her mother pump out hundreds of highly related sisters.
Rather than expending all the energy to raise a less related daughter on her own.
Exactly.
That reframes everything. The worker bees aren't these tragic, oppressed servants slaving away for a tyrannical queen. They're brilliant evolutionary strategists. By fiercely defending a hive, foraging for food, and raising their sisters, they are ensuring that a massive 75% chunk of their own genetic code survives into the future. It's a genetic long game.
It is the driving engine behind eusociality. It explains the swarms, the division of labor, the willingness of a worker bee to sacrifice her life and sting an intruder. She is protecting her massive genetic investment.
I get the math. It's brilliant. But I have to push back here because earlier you said 90% of bees are solitary. If Hamilton's math is right, and haplodiploidy makes creating these sister hives such an absolute, undeniable genetic slam dunk, why didn't every single bee species look at that math and say, yep, eusocial hives are the way to go?
It's the logical next question.
Right. Why are 19,000 species still single mothers struggling alone? Does the cost of the city outweigh the genetic benefit?
It's a fantastic question, and it represents one of the most vigorous debates in evolutionary biology today. You are exactly right to point out the costs. Haplodiploidy creates the potential for a hive mind, but it is not a biological
It's
imperative.
an option, not a rule.
Exactly. Running a eusocial colony of 50,000 individuals requires a staggering nonstop intake of calories. It requires complex pheromonal communication, and most dangerously, it creates a massive, stationary, highly concentrated target.
A gold mine for predators.
Predators, yes, but also pathogens. If a devastating fungus or a virulent virus gets into a densely packed hive of 50,000 genetically similar individuals, the disease can tear through the population and wipe out the entire colony in a matter of weeks. All that genetic investment just gone in a flash.
So for the solitary majority, it's about diversifying the portfolio.
Exactly. For a solitary mason bee nesting in a dead tree, or a fossorial sweat bee digging a tiny tunnel in the dirt, the solitary lifestyle is simply a more resilient strategy in an unpredictable environment.
They spread it out.
Yes, the solitary female wakes up in the spring, mates, finds a secure location like a hollow reed, builds a tiny waterproof cell out of mud or chewed leaves, packs it with a nutrient-rich pollen ball, lays a single egg, seals it up tightly, and moves on to build the next one.
She distributes the risk.
Yes. If a badger digs up one of her nests, or a fungus infects one cell, her entire genetic line isn't wiped out. Her other nests, hidden elsewhere, might survive. And it's crucial to note that she never meets her children. She provisions them, secures them, and dies long before they hatch.
Wow. But the sources also mention this fascinating middle ground, because biology rarely operates in strict binaries. What about communal bees? Because they aren't eusocial, but they aren't entirely alone either.
Oh, we see incredible intermediate steps. Some solitary bees live in what entomologists call aggregations. Imagine a particularly perfect sandy dirt bank facing the morning sun. You might see hundreds, even thousands of individual female bees digging their own separate tunnels right next to each other in that same dirt bank.
So they live in a dense neighborhood, like a massive apartment building.
Very much like an apartment building.
Yeah.
They are in close proximity because the real estate is good, but they do not interact. But in certain species, they take it one step further. Several fertile females might actually share a single communal entrance tunnel into the dirt.
Why share the door?
Because guarding one main entrance against parasitic wasps is much easier than each bee guarding her own front door.
But once they get past the shared lobby,
Once inside the communal entrance, they split off into their own separate private tunnels. They do not help each other forage for pollen. They do not share food. They do not raise each other's young. Every single female is fertile and responsible only for her own offspring. They are communal, but they are absolutely not eusocial.
okay, I love this. It is the exact biological equivalent of getting 3 roommates to split the high cost of rent and the security deposit, but you all have mini fridges in your own bedrooms and you absolutely do not share groceries.
That is a perfect modern analogy for communal nesting. The evolutionary pressure forces cooperation only at the threshold of security, but no further.
Okay, so whether a bee is managing the complex infrastructure of a 50,000 citizen metropolis or just surviving entirely alone in a dark dirt tunnel, the individual bee has developed some mind-bending biological mechanisms just to get through a single day.
Oh, without a doubt.
And that brings us to the physics, the navigation, and the internal biology of the animal. Because we have to start by debunking one of the most famous persistent myths in popular science, the flight myth.
Ugh. Ah, the classic dinner party trivia. According to all known laws of aviation, there's no way a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground.
Right. It's the opening line of a very famous animated movie, and it sounds so confidently scientific. But obviously, bees fly, so where did this terrible math come from?
The origin of this myth actually dates back to the 1930s. A French entomologist and aerodynamicist named Antoine Magnan, along with his assistant André Saint-Delogue, attempted to mathematically model the flight of a bumblebee.
Okay.
The fatal flaw in their research was that they applied aerodynamic equations that were explicitly designed for fixed-wing aircraft airplanes to a biological insect.
They treated the bee like a tiny Boeing 747.
Precisely. If you assume the bee's wings are perfectly rigid and you assume the air flows smoothly over them in a continuous line like an airplane wing, then yes, the mathematical calculations show that the bumblebee cannot generate enough lift to overcome its own mass. The math says it should plummet like a stone.
But the wings aren't rigid.
They're incredibly flexible. And more importantly, the mechanics of insect flight are completely different from fixed-wing flight. It wasn't until decades later, with the advent of extreme high-speed cinematography and complex robotic wing models in wind tunnels, that physicists finally understood the fluid dynamics at play.
What were they missing?
Bees aren't just flapping their wings straight up and straight down. They are constantly rotating them, sweeping them forward, flipping the angle, and sweeping them backward in a rapid, continuous figure-8 pattern.
And what does that figure-8 motion do to the air?
This rapid wing reversal, combined with a staggering wing beat frequency, sometimes up to 230 beats per second, creates powerful, swirling vortexes of air right along the leading edge of the wing.
Leading-edge vortices.
Exactly. Think of them as localized horizontal mini-tornadoes of extremely low pressure that sit directly above the wing during the downstroke.
Wait, miniature tornadoes?
Yeah. These vortices literally suck the bee upward into the air. The bee is dynamically generating large spikes of lift in real time with every single complex stroke.
I see. So if we stop comparing it to a commercial 747 gliding smoothly through the clouds on stiff wings, a better visual would be a helicopter violently, frantically treading water, churning up massive swirling currents just to rip itself upward and stay afloat.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize the chaos of insect aerodynamics. It is an incredibly energy-intensive, violent way to achieve flight, which, incidentally, is exactly why bees require a constant high-octane supply of sugary nectar just to keep those massive flight muscles firing.
Okay, so they use mini tornadoes to get airborne, but once they are in the air, how on earth do they know where they are going? Because we are talking about an animal whose entire brain is roughly the size of a sesame seed, yet the sources detail navigational precision that rivals modern GPS satellites.
The navigational capabilities of bees, particularly the eusocial foragers, are truly one of the marvels of the natural world. And to understand it, we really have to talk about Carl von Frisch.
He's the guy who won the Nobel Prize, right?
Yes. He was an Austrian ethologyist who dedicated his life to studying bee communication. He won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1973 for finally decoding what we now call the waggle dance.
The waggle dance. I've always heard this term, but reading the actual mechanics of it in these sources,
Right.
it honestly sounds like magic. Walk me through it.
Okay, imagine a foraging honeybee. She flies out of the hive, travels 2 miles across a complex landscape of trees and hills, and discovers a massive blooming patch of highly nutritious clover. She drinks her fill of nectar, packs her pollen baskets, and navigates back to the hive. But she doesn't just want to keep this a secret. She needs to recruit her sisters to harvest the patch before it fades.
So she goes inside the hive, but the inside of a hive is pitch black.
Pitch black, incredibly crowded and loud. She climbs onto a vertical frame of honeycomb and she begins to perform a very specific, highly structured rhythmic run in a figure-8 pattern. This is the waggle dance.
But they can't see her.
Right, because the other workers can't see her in the dark. They gather tightly around her, pressing their antenna against her body to feel the physical vibrations of her movements.
They're reading the dance through touch.
Yes, and the information she is transmitting through this tactile dance is astounding abstract geometry.
How does it work?
The dance consists of 2 loops with a straight waggle run down the middle. The angle of that straight waggle run, relative to strict vertical gravity on the comb, corresponds exactly to the angle of the food source relative to the position of the sun outside the hive.
Let me make sure I'm picturing this right. If she dances her straight line, pointing perfectly straight up toward the ceiling of the hive, she is telling her sisters, fly out the door and head directly toward the sun.
Yes. And if she adjusts her dance so that the straight run is tilted 90 degrees to the right of vertical, she is telling them, fly out, find the sun, keep it exactly at a 90-degree angle to your left shoulder, and fly straight. She is using gravity in the dark as a stand-in for the sun in the sky.
That is incredible geometry. But wait, the sun isn't stationary. If she found the clover patch at noon, but it takes her 20 minutes to forage and fly back, the sun has moved across the sky. The angle is different by the time she does the dance.
This is where it goes from geometry to advanced calculus. The bee possesses an internal circadian clock. As she flies home, her brain is actively calculating the passage of time and the corresponding movement of the sun across the azimuth.
She's doing math on the fly.
Exactly. When she performs the dance, she automatically adjusts the angle to account for the sun's current position, not its position when she found the flowers.
She is adjusting for planetary rotation in a brain the size of a seed.
And it gets better. The angle gives the direction, but the duration of the waggle phase tells them the exact distance. 1 second of vibrating waggling generally translates to roughly 1 kilometer of flight distance required.
Unbelievable.
She is communicating abstract spatial coordinates, adjusting for time using tactile geometry. Furthermore, even if the sky is completely overcast and the sun is hidden behind thick clouds, the bee's compound eyes can read the specific polarization patterns of the ultraviolet light piercing through the clouds. From that polarization, she can perfectly calculate where the sun is hidden. She's a flying compass, clock, and polarized light sensor.
I am genuinely humbled, but it's not just their brains that are highly complex. Let's look inward at their stomachs. Because earlier we talked about their diet. Drinking nectar makes sense. It's essentially just a natural energy drink, simple sugars. But digesting pollen, that sounds like a biochemical nightmare.
It is a massive physiological challenge. Pollen grains are essentially tiny, armored biological vaults. They're encased in an incredibly tough outer shell called the exene, which is designed to survive extreme environmental stress. Inside that shell, the nutrients are locked up in complex polysaccharides like pectin and hemicellulose.
Like plant fiber.
Right, and a bee on its own does not produce the necessary digestive enzymes to break down pectin.
So how do they get the protein out of the vault? They outsource the labor.
Exactly. Just like humans rely on a gut microbiome to digest complex plant matter, bees rely on a highly specialized, highly conserved community of bacteria living in their hindgut. But what's fascinating here is the rigid structure of that community. Research has identified a core group of bacterial species that almost all bees share.
Right, the sources name them specifically. You have Snodgrassella and Lactobacillus.
Those two bacteria are primarily responsible for handling the simple sugars and regulating the oxygen levels in the gut. But then you have a second specialized team, bacteria like Gilliamella and Bifidobacterium.
What do they do?
Their entire evolutionary purpose within the bee is to manufacture the specific enzymes needed to crack open the tough pectin and hemicellulose in the pollen.
So the bacteria themselves have established a strict division of labor.
They absolutely have, and it goes even deeper into metabolic interdependency. Genomic sequencing shows that some of these bacterial strains lack the genetic ability to produce certain vital amino acids that they need to survive.
They're missing parts.
Yes. However, a completely different bacterial species living right next to them in the gut can produce that missing amino acid, and they actively share. They swap enzymes, nutrients, and metabolic byproducts to collectively orchestrate the breakdown of the tough pollen, feeding both themselves and their bee host.
I love this concept. The macrobiology perfectly mirrors the microbiology. Think about it. The entire hive survives because of a strict cooperative division of labor among the sister bees. And inside the stomach of a single one of those bees, the bacteria survive because of a strict cooperative division of labor on a microscopic scale. It's fractals all the way down. Nature just finds a working blueprint and repeats it at every level of reality.
That is a beautiful synthesis. Evolutionary solutions that work tend to be conserved and repeated.
Now, speaking of evolutionary solutions, we've spent all this time establishing the rules. Bees eat pollen, bees eat nectar, but we're talking about a clade of 20,000 species, and biology loves an outlier. There's one D highlighted in the encyclopedic sources that completely throws out the vegetarian rulebook. The vulture bee, the genus Trigona. I read this section, blinked, and actually had to read it again just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating.
Yes. The vulture bees, primarily found in the dense tropical rainforests of South America. They represent an incredible, almost shocking evolutionary pivot.
Okay, set the scene for me. What are these bees doing?
Well, these particular stingless bees have completely abandoned millions of years of coevolution with flowers. They do not visit flowers, they do not collect nectar, they do not collect pollen.
So what do?
Their hind legs, which in other bees have those specialized pollen baskets, have actually begun to physically shrink because they don't use them anymore. Instead of seeking out blooming orchids, they seek out death. They actively forage for animal carcasses carrion.
Wait, dead animals?
We are talking dead monkeys, lizards, birds, frogs rotting on the jungle floor.
I am picturing a swarm of bees landing on a dead lizard. What are they physically doing to it?
They are butchers. They use their mandibles, which have sharp specialized teeth, to slice off tiny pieces of the rotting animal flesh. They swallow the raw decaying meat stored in their internal crop, which is a specialized stomach, and they fly back to their hive.
But meat rots, especially in a hot jungle. If they store rotting meat in a warm hive, shouldn't the putrefying bacteria completely overwhelm and kill the colony?
That is the genius of their adaptation. Their gut microbiome has radically evolved. Remember the Snodgrassella and Lactobacillus we just talked about?
Yeah.
In vulture bees, Those bacterial populations have shifted to closely resemble the gut microbiomes of vultures and hyenas. They are packed with acid-producing bacteria that completely sterilize and break down the dangerous pathogens in the rotting meat.
And what comes out the other end?
Once the sterile, broken-down meat is processed, the bees regurgitate it back at the hive. They transform this dead animal flesh into a stable, protein-rich glandular substance that they use to feed their developing larvae.
They make meat honey.
Functionally, yes. It is an edible, stable, honey-like substance derived entirely from carrion, meat honey.
That is absolutely terrifying, but it proves just how adaptable this biological framework is. If a niche opens up, evolution will fill it, even if it means turning a flower-loving pollinator into a tiny flying hyena.
It's ruthless efficiency.
And this leads us directly into the reality of the environment they live in. Because whether you are a vulture bee eating a dead monkey in the Amazon, or a tiny, shimmering green sweat bee drinking nectar from a daisy in a suburban backyard, the outside world is an incredibly hostile place. Bees are constantly under attack from all sides.
The ecological web surrounding the bee is fraught with danger. Because bees are equipped with a highly effective venomous stinger, they have inadvertently become the gold standard model for survival through deception. This brings us to the complex world of mimicry.
Right. If you have a weapon, everyone else wants people to think they have a weapon too. Let's talk about Batesian mimicry, the ultimate fake-it-till-you-make-it evolutionary strategy.
Batesian mimicry occurs when a completely harmless, defenseless species evolves over vast stretches of time to physically resemble a dangerous or toxic species.
Like wearing a disguise.
Exactly.
Why?
Because bees are so heavily defended, countless harmless insects, like hoverflies, bee flies, and even certain species of clearing moths, have adopted their uniform. They sport the exact same bright orange, black, and yellow aposematic warning colors.
And it's not just visual, right? They commit to the bit.
They are method actors. Some hoverflies will actively mimic the jerky, erratic flight patterns of a bumblebee. They will vibrate their wings at specific frequencies to produce a loud, threatening buzz.
That's hilarious.
Birds and other visual predators have learned the hard way that black and yellow stripes equal a mouthful of agonizing venom, so they actively avoid anything wearing those colors. The harmless fly steals the bee's hard-earned reputation for its own protection.
But then there's Müllerian mimicry, which the sources note is a fundamentally different strategy.
Yes. Müllerian mimicry is not deception. It is a mutual defense pact. This occurs when two or more actually dangerous species evolve to look like each other. So, you have aggressive wasps, highly toxic blister beetles, and venomous bees all sharing that exact same black, yellow, and orange color palette.
They aren't faking it. They can all hurt you.
Exactly. They are cooling their advertising budget. By all wearing the exact same high-contrast uniform, they reinforce a single unmistakable message to any predator in the ecosystem. Do not eat us, or you will deeply regret it. It makes the learning curve for a young bird much faster, which saves insect lives.
And it's not just other insects playing dress-up. Plants are in on the grift, too. The section on the bee orchid is wild.
The bee orchid, Ophrys apifera, is a masterclass in botanical deception. Most flowers offer a fair trade. You spread my pollen, I give you sugary nectar. The bee orchid offers absolutely nothing. Instead, the flower itself has evolved to look uncannily like a female bee resting on a green petal. It has the rounded shape, the fuzzy texture, and the coloring.
But surely a bee's compound eyes are good enough to spot a fake visual eventually, right?
Visual mimicry only gets the plant so far. The true deception is chemical. The bee orchid synthesizes and emits complex chemical pheromones that perfectly mimic the sexual mating scent of a receptive female bee.
Oh, wow. So a male bee is flying along. He smells this overwhelming, intoxicating pheromone. He visually spots what looks exactly like a female resting on a stem, and he swoops down to mate with it.
Yes. The scientific term is pseudocopulation. The male bee lands on the flower, aggressively attempts to mate with the furry lip of the orchid, and in all his frantic thrashing and vibrating, the orchid strategically slaps a sticky packet of pollen directly onto his head or thorax.
Just glues it on.
Eventually, the male realizes he's been fooled, gives up in frustration, and flies off.
Only to get fooled by another bee orchid 100 yards down the road.
Exactly. And in doing so, he perfectly transfers the pollen between the deceptive flowers. He gets nothing but exhaustion. The plant gets free reproduction.
That poor guy. Just getting absolutely played by a plant. But getting swindled by an orchid is nothing compared to the actual physical predators stalking bees. The sources detail some brutal interactions. For instance, European badgers are heavily armored, and they will literally dig up a massive bumblebee nest hidden in the ground, ignore the hundreds of stinging bees, and eat everything. The wax pots, the fat larvae, the adult bees.
Badgers are relentless.
But the one that really stood out to me was the bee wolf.
Ah, the bee wolves. The genus Philanthus. These are a type of large, solitary, predatory wasp that specialize almost entirely in hunting bees. Their impact on local bee populations can be staggering.
How staggering.
The famous ethologist Nico Tinbergen, who was another Nobel laureate, spent extensive time observing a localized colony of bee wolves, specifically Philanthus triangulum. Based on his detailed field observations, he estimated that this one single localized population of hunting wasps was actively paralyzing and killing several thousand honeybees every single day during the peak summer months.
Thousands a day. How do they hunt them?
It is an aerial ambush. A bee wolf will hover near a patch of blooming flowers, wait for a worker bee to land and become distracted by gathering nectar, and then strike. They swoop down, grapple the bee, and immediately deliver a precise sting to the underside of the bee's thorax, hitting the main nerve ganglia.
So it's paralyzed.
This paralyzes the bee instantly but keeps it alive. The wasp then carries the living paralyzed bee back to its deep underground burrow, lays an egg on it, and seals it in. The wasp larva hatches and eats the bee alive over several days.
That is brutal. But honestly, the wildest, most sinister enemy to me isn't a badger or a hunting wasp. It's other bees, the brood parasites, the cuckoo bees.
This is a very dark, fascinating corner of evolutionary ecology. Nature is remarkably efficient, and sometimes the most efficient way to raise your young is to force someone else to do the heavy lifting. There are entire major lineages of bees, like the sprawling subfamily Nomadinae, that have completely lost the physical ability to collect pollen. Over millions of years, evolution stripped away their scopal hairs and their pollen baskets. They do not build nests. They are obligate parasites.
They're evolutionary deadbeats.
Survival of the fittest takes many forms, and parasitism is highly effective. The strategy of a female cuckoo bee is stealth. She will locate the nest of a hard-working, solitary, pollen-collecting bee. She waits patiently nearby until the host mother leaves to go forage for more pollen. The moment the host is gone, the cuckoo bee sneaks inside the burrow and quickly lays her own egg inside the freshly provisioned cell.
And what happens when the eggs hatch? Does the host mother notice?
The host mother usually seals the nest without noticing the extra egg. The cuckoo bee egg is uniquely adapted to hatch slightly faster than the host egg. When the parasitic cuckoo larva emerges, it is equipped with massive, sickle-shaped, sharp mandibles. It crawls over, locates the host egg or newly hatched host larva, and aggressively murders it. Once the competition is eliminated, the cuckoo larva calmly sits back and consumes the massive nutrient-rich pollen ball that the host mothers spend weeks painstakingly gathering.
It is an inside job, and the encyclopedias highlight one specific example of parasitism that elevates this from a sneaky theft to a full-blown horror movie: the Arctic cuckoo bumblebee. Bombus hyperboreus.
Yes, Hyperboreus operates on an entirely different level of violence. They don't just sneak an egg into a dark, unattended hole. A female Hyperboreus will actively seek out the fully established, bustling colony of a different Arctic bumblebee species.
She just walks in.
She marches right through the front door, physically attacks the host colony's queen, and fights her to the death.
Regicide.
Literally. Once the host queen is dead, the Hyperboreus female secrete powerful chemical pheromones that suppress the aggressive instincts of the remaining host workers. She effectively brainwashes them, enslaving the entire workforce of the colony.
That's insane.
She then lays her own eggs and forces the host workers to spend the rest of their short lives foraging and raising her parasitic offspring instead of their own sisters.
It is a hostile, violent corporate takeover in the freezing Arctic.
What makes Hyperboreus so unique in the evolutionary record is that, unlike most parasitic bees that have lost their pollen-gathering anatomy, Hyperboreus actually retained her pollen baskets.
Why keep them if you're a parasite?
In the severe, unpredictable freezing environment of the high Arctic tundra, the narrow breeding season is so short that you cannot always guarantee you will find a host colony to conquer. So she retained the anatomical flexibility to gather her own pollen and start her own nest if she absolutely has to. She is a facultative parasite, an opportunist.
Okay, so we've established that a bee's life is perilous. They are dealing with predatory wasps paralyzing them from the sky, badgers digging up their cities, deceptive orchids stealing their time, and murderous cuckoo bees enslaving their families.
It's a tough world.
But here's the critical point. Bees have co-evolved alongside all of those natural stressors for tens of millions of years. They know the playbook. They have defenses. The problem we are facing right now, and our sources go into this with stark, sobering data, is the sudden introduction of entirely new, invisible threats that bees have absolutely zero evolutionary defenses against. We have to talk about synthetic chemical stressors.
This is where the narrative shifts from a story of balanced ecological struggles to a story of physiological overload. To understand the threat, we first need to be clear about the baseline. Plants naturally produce toxic chemicals.
Right.
Alkaloids, caffeine, nicotine, tannins. These are all natural biological pesticides that plants evolved to deter herbivores from eating their leaves.
Right, a plant doesn't want to be eaten, so it makes itself slightly poisonous.
Exactly. And because bees rely on plants, they encounter these natural toxins constantly in the nectar and pollen. But over millions of years of coevolution, the complex gut microbiomes and the detoxifying liver-like enzymes of the bees have evolved to handle them.
You can filter it out.
Right. When a bee ingests a sublethal dose of natural rhododendron toxins or natural caffeine from a citrus flower, it processes it. It doesn't crash the population.
The system can handle natural friction, but synthetic insecticides are an entirely different ballgame.
Completely different in scale and mechanism. The comparative toxicological studies we reviewed are unambiguous. They indicate that modern synthetic insecticides, particularly a ubiquitous class of chemicals called neonicotinoids, are estimated to be between 1,000 and 10,000 times more acutely toxic to bees than the most common natural plant alkaloids.
Up to 10,000 times more toxic.
The potency is staggering.
Yeah.
But the core issue driving pollinator decline isn't just acute toxicity, meaning the bee gets sprayed directly and dies on contact. The much more insidious, widespread threat is chronic sublethal exposure.
Explain how that works, because neonicotinoids are systemic, right? What does systemic mean for the plant?
Systemic means the pesticide isn't just sprayed on the surface of the leaves where it can wash off. The chemical is often coated onto the agricultural seed before it is even planted. As the plant grows, it absorbs the neonicotinoid into its vascular system.
It's inside the plant.
The chemical becomes integrated into the very tissue of the plant, which means when the plant finally blooms, the neurotoxin is actively expressed inside the pollen and the nectar.
So the plant is serving poisoned food. And this leads me to my biggest question. Earlier, we spent all that time marveling at how a bee uses polarized UV light, an internal sun compass, and a mental map of landmarks to navigate miles away from the hive and return safely.
The waggle dance and all that, yes.
What exactly does a microscopic, non-lethal dose of a neonicotinoid do to that cognitive map? Is it like a computer virus actively erasing the hard drive, or is it more like giving the bee a scrambled, glitching GPS system?
From a neurological standpoint, it is much more like a scrambled, glitching GPS. Neonicotinoids are designed to bind directly to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in an insect's central nervous system. In a bee's brain, these specific neural pathways are entirely responsible for cognitive functions like learning, memory retention, and spatial orientation.
So the data is still there, they just can't access it?
Correct. The hard drive isn't wiped clean. The data retrieval system is jammed. The bee flies out miles into the field, successfully gathers nectar, and then turns to fly home. But the neural mechanisms required to accurately calculate the sun's moving angle, or the ability to recognize the sequential landmark cues leading back to the hive, are disrupted by the chemical binding to their receptors.
That's heartbreaking.
The bee simply becomes disoriented, gets lost in the landscape, runs out of flight energy, and dies alone in the field.
And if that happens to enough individual foragers?
The hive starves. You lose the workforce, no food comes in, and the colony collapses. And this effect compounds synergistically. The toxicological data shows that these chemicals also actively suppress the bee's immune system.
So it's a double hit.
Exactly. So a bee that is disoriented is also suddenly far more vulnerable to those natural ancient parasites we discussed, like the varroa mite or the devastating gut fungus Nosema ceranae. It becomes a synergistic cascade of failures.
Now, looking at the modern regulatory response to all of this data, it's important to note the historical facts neutrally here. Following extensive multi-year risk assessments regarding these exact navigational and immune system failures, the European Food Safety Authority, the ESSA, issued comprehensive scientific reports in 2018.
That's right.
Based directly on those ecological risk assessments, the European Union implemented a strict ban on the outdoor agricultural use of 3 major neonicotinoids: imidacloprid, clothianidin, and thiamethoxam.
Yes, that was a major regulatory shift. Under those rules, these chemicals are still permitted for use inside fully sealed permanent greenhouses. But broad field use was halted specifically to mitigate the documented ecological impact on both managed and wild pollinator populations.
It is a clear regulatory response to the biological data.
It highlights the profound ongoing tension between the demands of modern high-yield agricultural efficiency and the hard biological limits of the pollinators that those very agricultural systems rely on. We are introducing persistent synthetic neurotoxins alongside heavy metals from road traffic and synergistic fungicide mixtures into environments at a pace that these creatures simply haven't had the deep evolutionary time to adapt to.
Which brings us perfectly into our final overarching theme, because despite all these natural and synthetic gauntlets, humans have been pulling bees into our cultural and economic orbit for millennia.
We really have.
We've looked at their 124 million year evolution, their bizarre haplodiploid biology, their struggles in the wild, but the story of the bee is completely inextricably linked to the story of humanity. We have been obsessed with them for a very, very long time.
The archaeological record unequivocally confirms it. We have discovered cave paintings in the spider caves of eastern Spain that date back roughly 15,000 years to the Paleolithic era.
Wow, 15,000 years.
These rock paintings clearly depict human figures scaling long rope ladders, using smoke to pacify swarms of wild bees, and harvesting honeycombs from cliff faces. Our intimate, extractive relationship with bees predates the invention of formal agriculture by thousands of years.
And because that relationship is so ancient, it deeply permeated our early mythology. In ancient Greece, honey wasn't just sugar, it was considered the ambrosia of the gods, conferring immortality. You have the myth of Melissa, the nymph who supposedly discovered honey and nursed the infant god Zeus with it.
The Delphic Oracle, too.
Yes. Even the Delphic Oracle, the most powerful prophetess in the ancient world who delivered divine truth from the gods, was historically sometimes referred to as the Delphic bee. There is this incredibly deep-seated human idea across cultures that bees are somehow connected to the divine, to purity, or to hidden knowledge.
You see that reverence echoed across European history as well. There's a beautiful, deeply melancholic piece of folklore known as telling the bees, which was widely practiced in England, Ireland, and parts of early America.
I love this tradition. Tell them about it.
It was a strict cultural protocol. Whenever there was a major life event in a household, a marriage, a birth, a long journey, and most especially a death in the family, the head of the household or the widow would immediately go out to the hives in the garden.
Just drop everything and go to the bees?
Right. They would knock gently on the wood to get the bees' attention, and they would softly speak to the bees, formally informing them of the news. During a funeral, the hives would even be draped in black mourning crepe.
Because the superstition was that if you didn't extend them the courtesy of telling them the family news, the bees would get deeply offended, stop producing honey, or simply die of grief.
Right. It demonstrates a level of respect, a perceived sentience, and a familial inclusion that we rarely, if ever, afford to any other agricultural insect. You don't see farmers telling the silkworms or telling the aphids.
Definitely not.
The bee holds a unique psychological space. You see the structure of the hive continually used as a political and social metaphor by Aristotle, by Karl Marx, by Shakespeare in Henry V. W. Yeats, wrote longingly about building a hive for peace in the Lake Isle of Innisfree. Beatrix Potter illustrated them for children. We have constantly projected our own human societal ideals, diligence, tireless teamwork, royalty, loyalty directly onto the honeybee.
But the reality of our modern 21st century relationship with bees is far less romantic, far less poetic, and far more industrial. We love the poetry of the hive, but the cold truth is we rely on them for sheer caloric survival. The encyclopedia sources note a statistic that should give everyone pause. Approximately 1/3 of the entire human food supply depends directly on insect pollination.
1 in every 3 bites of food you eat. It is the invisible pillar of global agriculture. We aren't just talking about a little honey on toast here. We are talking about the structural integrity of our diet. Apples, almonds, blueberries, squash, cucumbers, cherries, avocados.
And because of that massive, unyielding global demand, the commercial relationship between humans and bees has fundamentally shifted over the last few decades. It's no longer primarily about an old man in a white suit making honey to sell in little plastic bears at the local farmer's market.
Not at all.
The real money, the actual agricultural backbone of the industry, is contract pollination.
This is a fascinating, staggering logistical reality that most consumers are completely blind to. In the United States today, commercial beekeepers operate on an industrial scale. They load tens of thousands of wooden hives onto the back of massive flatbed 18-wheeler trucks.
Literally strapping the hives to trucks.
They then drive these millions, sometimes billions of bees, thousands of miles across the interstate highway system, physically chasing the agricultural blooms across the continent.
They are literal itinerant farm workers.
They're the ultimate migrant workforce. A single commercial hive might start the year in the Central Valley of California in February to pollinate the massive, endless monoculture of the almond bloom.
Okay.
Once the almond petals drop, that exact same hive is loaded back onto a truck and driven to the Pacific Northwest to pollinate the apple orchards in the spring. By summer, they might be trucked all the way across the country to Maine to pollinate the blueberry barrens before finally being shipped to Florida to overwinter.
That is just, think about the sheer stress of that. We talked about how finely tuned their navigational systems are, how they rely on a stable sun compass and local landmarks. Now imagine being locked in a vibrating wooden box, driven down Interstate 80 at 70 miles an hour for 3 days, and released into a completely alien landscape that consists of only one single type of flower for miles in every direction.
It creates immense physiological stress on the colonies. The diet in a monoculture eating only almond pollen for weeks is nutritionally deficient compared to a wild, diverse meadow.
It's like eating fast food every day.
Exactly. Combine that poor diet with the sheer physical stress of transportation, the rapid spread of diseases when millions of hives from across the country are mixed together in one valley, and the exposure to agricultural chemicals. And you begin to see why commercial colony loss rates are so concerningly high.
Which raises a really important, deeply uncomfortable question. We have literally built our global food security, the foundation of human agriculture, on the backs of a highly sensitive insect that is currently fighting off systemic neurotoxins, invasive parasitic mites, and the immense stress of being driven across the country on a flatbed truck.
It encapsulates the great glaring paradox of our modern relationship with the bee. We continue to exalt them in our art, our poetry, and our cultural imagination as beautiful symbols of immortality, divine truth, and natural harmony. Yet practically, we treat them industrially as highly disposable cogs in a massive agricultural machine.
We just burn them out.
We push them to the absolute ragged edge of their biological limits, primarily because our own survival is inextricably tethered to theirs.
And our obsession with what bees produce extends far past the grocery store and into the medicine cabinet. Which brings me to a point in the literature that I feel strongly I have to push back on. The sources mention apitherapy.
Yes, apitherapy.
For those who don't know, this is a branch of alternative medicine that uses raw honey, propolis, royal jelly, and even live bee venom apitoxin to treat a massive variety of human ailments. Because of that ancient mythology we just talked about, we have this deeply romanticized idea that because bees are ancient, natural, and pure, everything they produce must be biological magic. I've seen alternative health blogs claim that deliberate bee stings can cure everything from arthritis to cancer.
Yes, and it is crucial to address this clearly based on our sources. The medical literature we reviewed is unambiguous on this point. The claim that apitherapy, specifically the use of bee venom, cures cancer or reverses complex autoimmune diseases, is completely unsupported by any rigorous, peer-reviewed, evidence-based clinical medicine.
Right, sometimes venom is just venom.
Exactly.
It is a highly evolved, complex cocktail of defensive proteins and peptides specifically designed by millions of years of evolution to cause immediate, acute pain, inflammation, and cellular damage to a mammalian predator. We can deeply respect the bee. We can absolutely protect the bee from ecological collapse without needing to turn it into a magical, mythical pharmacy.
Exactly. We need to value them for their undeniable, crucial ecological function pollination, rather than projecting scientifically unfounded mystical cures onto their defensive weapons. The truth of what they do for the planet is impressive enough without needing embellishment.
Though, to be completely fair to human resourcefulness, they are highly nutritious if you strip away the mysticism and just, eat them.
Well, yes.
The encyclopedia sources detail botok tawon, a traditional dish from Java in Indonesia. Have you seen this?
Yes, the culinary use of bee brood.
They take the actual bee larvae and pupae straight from the comb, mix them with shredded coconut, chili, and spices, wrap the whole mixture in fresh banana leaves, and steam it. And apparently, from a purely nutritional standpoint, bee brood is a superfood. It is densely packed with high-quality protein, essential B vitamins, and vital minerals.
Entomophagy, the practice of eating insects, is incredibly common globally and has been for millennia. Given how efficiently bees convert pollen into high-density tissue, Their larvae are a highly logical, efficient source of nutrients for humans. It's simply another, far more practical way that humans have utilized the biological output of the hive.
Okay, we have covered a truly immense amount of ground today. Let's take a breath and do a quick wrap up of the journey we've been on. We started 124 million years ago with a vicious, carnivorous, prehistoric wasp actively hunting other insects on the fracturing supercontinent of Gondwana.
We watched that wasp taste a side salad of pollen, switch its diet, and survive the nuclear winter of a dinosaur-killing asteroid to co-evolve alongside the very first flowering plants.
We explored the staggering sheer diversity of the clade Anthophila. We realized that out of 20,000 species, only 7 are honeybees. The rest are solitary single mothers, ranging from the size of a pinhead to a flying thumb, navigating a terrifyingly hostile world using 5 separate eyes and a built-in polarized sun compass.
We looked at the dizzying, warped genetic math of haplodiploidy, where sisters share 75% of their DNA, driving the creation of massive eusocial empires. We marveled at the strict microbiological division of labor happening right inside their stomachs.
And we faced the terrifying ecological reality of regicidal cuckoo bees hunting bee wolves and synthetic neonicotinoids actively scrambling their fragile neural maps. And finally, we traced their long journey into human mythology, from Paleolithic cave paintings to the back of roaring 18-wheelers powering our modern global food supply.
It is, without hyperbole, one of the most profound and complex biological sagas on planet Earth.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought, something to just mull over as you go about your day, building on an idea we barely touched on. We talked earlier about the vulture bees of the genus Trigona, the bees in the Amazon that essentially evolved backwards, abandoning millions of years of deeply ingrained, specialized flower gathering to suddenly start butchering rotting animal carcasses and producing sterile meat honey.
A radical evolutionary pivot.
Right. So think about this. If a bee, driven by environmental pressure or a new open niche, can make a biological leap that horrifying and that radically different from its ancestors, what happens next?
But in the future, you mean?
Yeah. If global climate change drastically and permanently shifts our floral landscapes, if the specific seasonal flowers they have relied on for 100 million years wither and disappear, what other completely unimaginable adaptations might bees develop in the future just to survive? Could the bees of a million years from now look completely alien to us? Might they find a new, entirely separate source of protein that we can't even fathom today?
It's a chilling thought, but a very real evolutionary possibility. The history of the bee proves one thing above all else. Nature finds a way to survive, even if the path it takes becomes utterly unrecognizable to us.
Think about that the next time you see a cartoon drawing of a plump little yellow and black bug holding a wooden honey bucket. Because the buzzing biological reality out there in your garden is so much weirder, so much older, and so much more resilient than a cartoon. Thank you so much for sitting at the table with us and joining us on this deep dive. Keep your eyes peeled for those silent, solitary bees building their homes in the dirt, and we'll catch you next time.